Have you ever had a really good conversation with someone, maybe at a party or a work event or a friend of a friend situation, and left genuinely thinking you'd like to see that person again, and then you never did? Not because anything went wrong, just because nothing happened after. That gap between a good moment and an actual friendship is one of the quieter puzzles of adult life. Most people assume that if the connection is real, it will naturally continue, that chemistry does the work, that good interactions find their own momentum. But here's the strange part, they almost never do on their own. Think about how most acquaintances actually function. You run into them occasionally, the conversation is warm every single time. You might even call them a great person, but months pass and you're not any closer. The contact keeps happening, but nothing deepens. It's like water that stays at the same temperature no matter how long you wait. Comfortable, but not going anywhere. What's actually happening here is not a lack of connection, it's a lack of continuation. The difference between a pleasant acquaintance and an actual friend is not a feeling, it's a set of small, specific behaviors that most people never do after a good interaction. And when you look at what those behaviors actually are, they are surprisingly simple, which makes it a little strange that almost nobody does them. The first one is using someone's name. This sounds almost too basic to mention, but there's something real happening here. A person's own name is one of the most attention-grabbing sounds they can hear. Using it, especially when it's not strictly necessary, signals that this person is an individual to you, not just whoever is in front of you. Most people remember names in theory and forget to use them in practice. Here's where it gets more interesting. The same logic applies to details, not just names, but specifics. If someone mentioned their sister was getting married, or that they were nervous about a job interview, or that they hate cold weather, those details are small keys. Bringing them back up later, even casually, sends a signal that you were actually listening, not performing attention, but actually paying it. Dale Carnegie called listening one of the highest value social skills, and it's a little underrated even now. The reason it works is not mysterious. When someone feels genuinely heard, they feel important, and people naturally want to be around people who make them feel that way. It's not manipulation, it's just how attention functions between humans. What most people miss, though, is the follow-through problem. You can listen brilliantly in the moment, remember every detail, use the name perfectly, and still end up as a pleasant acquaintance forever. Because after the conversation ends, nothing is initiated. This is where the actual work is. A real, specific invitation does something that vague, positive energy cannot. "We should hang out sometime" is not an invitation. "Are you free Friday evening? There's a market near me that's worth checking out" is. One is a feeling, the other is a door. Most adults leave the door firmly shut and then wonder why nobody walks through. And there's a reason people hesitate to make specific invitations. It feels exposed. You're committing to something, putting yourself in a position where the other person has to actually respond. That's uncomfortable. So instead, people keep the exchange warm but non-committal, and nothing moves. Here's a useful way to think about it. Imagine a connection, like a plant that exists between two people. After a good conversation, that plant is alive, but very small. It needs water to grow. The water is continuation, a follow-up message, a specific plan, a remembered detail brought back up later, a genuine invitation. Without that, the plant doesn't die dramatically, it just quietly dries out. You both stay nice to each other, the warmth is real, but nothing grows. Now, sometimes the plant just isn't meant to grow. Not every good conversation is a potential friendship. Some people are enjoyable in one context and genuinely have nothing to build on outside of it. That's not a failure. It's worth naming because a lot of adults carry low-grade guilt about connections that were always situational. Letting those go is not a social skill failure. It's clarity. But for the connections that do have potential, the default human behavior is to wait for the other person to reach out first, to wait for a natural occasion, to assume that if it's meant to happen, it will happen. That's a comfortable idea, but it means outsourcing something that genuinely needs your input. And that assumption is where most potential friendships quietly end. What's interesting is that making the first move repeatedly is not as asymmetric as it feels. Most people are relieved when someone else takes the step. They were also waiting. The person who initiates is not giving more, they're just breaking the standstill. And a friendship built on one person initiating early often becomes genuinely mutual once the pattern is established. One small, almost overlooked habit is worth mentioning: remembering occasions. A birthday message, a quick note when something reminded you of them, a follow-up after something they mentioned being anxious about. These are not grand gestures. They're tiny signals that say, "You exist in my mind when you're not in front of me." That is actually what friendship is, in practical terms. Someone who is real to you when they're absent. Small, consistent acts of genuine acknowledgement, the kind that reference something specific and real, are easy to do and almost never done. There's also something in how you approach the invitation itself. Rather than presenting a fully formed plan and waiting for approval, there's more traction in making the other person feel like they're part of shaping it. I was thinking about trying that new place downtown. Would that be something you'd want to do? Lands differently than "I've booked a table, come if you want." The first one invites participation. The second one just delivers a decision. So why do 99% of acquaintances stay acquaintances? Not because the potential wasn't there. Usually it was. Not because the conversation wasn't good. It often was great. It's because the small, specific behaviors that create continuity, using names, remembering details, making real invitations, following up, initiating again, are just uncommon enough that both people wait for the other person to do them first. And if both people are waiting, nothing happens. The mechanism itself is weirdly simple once you see it. Friendship doesn't require chemistry to do extra work. It doesn't require you to be more extroverted or more charming than you are. It requires two people willing to be slightly uncomfortable, slightly exposed, and slightly intentional about showing up after the conversation ends. Usually, one person has to go first. If you find yourself curious about how small social habits shape the relationships around us, there's probably more on this channel worth exploring. Subscribing keeps those ideas coming your way.